Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the VeChain research on carbon credits and carbon emissions. Today we have Michael. Michael, can you introduce yourself and let everyone know what you do within this space?
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Michael Mezzatesta. I am head of growth at the Climate Collective. And so the Climate Collective is a network and a coalition of companies and organizations building in the Web3 climate space. So we've brought together a lot of the biggest organizations in the ecosystem to foster more collaboration and find ways to advance the interests of the entire ecosystem under the kind of assumption that a rising tide will lift all boats, and we want to help sort of advocate for the industry. A big part of the role we play is providing a more independent voice for the industry. So we don't have a product, we don't sell something. We are set up as an industry advocacy group. And so as a result, we think our role is really to bring this blockchain climate movement to stakeholders and broader horizons, including climate policymakers, economists, business leaders, and stakeholders outside of our little niche. And just last point about what I do is I'm focused very much on the kind of communications, marketing, and credibility building among those stakeholder groups that I mentioned.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So what, in your view, what are the benefits of tracking carbon emissions, carbon credits, carbon offsets on the blockchain?
Yeah, so I think of a few sort of key things. There's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I'll list my favorite kind of answers, which are, number one, I think it's the amount that we as a society and as a species have to move to solve this very scary and complicated issue of climate change is somewhat overwhelming sometimes. And the amount of progress that needs to be made and the complexity of the problem there's a reason so many people have anxiety around it, right? It's a huge challenge. And a big part of the challenge is coordination. Like, how do we get so many different stakeholders with so many different interests, whether they're nation states or corporations or international governmental institutions, to work together? Because all that really matters is that we solve this and that we actually prevent global warming beyond, I think that the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius is a good one. We want to stop it there. And so it's a massive human coordination issue. And I think what blockchain provides is a really useful, public, transparent coordination tool. This is particularly helpful for carbon markets, and I think that's the most common use case that people speak about blockchain and climate around. Like the whole idea of having a marketplace where carbon credits and carbon offsets can be bought and sold. This is becoming a much more popular topic in the last few years because so many corporations are committing to net zero targets and saying, like, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 or carbon neutral by 2050. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're going to decarbonize their business models, and any carbon that they're still emitting is going to be offset by carbon asset purchases, which effectively means money going into projects that are taking carbon out of the atmosphere, whether that's by growing trees or by pulling it into minerals. There are a bunch of cool technologies that are being built, right? But if you zoom out and think about everything I just said, which was a lot of a lot of things that need to happen, one thing that can really power this entire transition is if we have an open, clear, transparent marketplace for these carbon credits. If these transactions are happening in a black box and someone in one country can't see what someone in another country is doing, and they're using different standards and different methodologies, it's much less likely that it's going to work and that people are going to trust each other. And so what's nice about distributed ledger technology and blockchain is that it provides an open, transparent data layer to run these markets on top of, so that everyone can be using the same system and that everything can be accounted for. And I think that is basically just a tool that that can be used to help make sure that decarbonization happens faster. I can go on, but I'm going to pause there because I realize I just threw a lot at you, but I can go through a few other use cases if you want me to.
Yeah, like keep going with the use case. There's a lot to unpack, but I'll unpack afterward. Please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, another great use case for this technology is measurement, reporting, and verification of climate impact. People in the industry call it MRV. It's basically like, okay, when a project developer or someone who's a land steward or a farmer or a regenerative, agriculture sort of practitioner is claiming carbon credits due to work that they're doing to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, we need to have a good system for actually verifying those claims, right? Otherwise, we're opening up a system that can be fraudulent. And I'm not saying that many of these product developers are lying about their claims, but I do think that there needs to be some level of being able to say, okay, if $1 million of carbon credits goes into this decarbonization effort, that we get an actually measurable and verifiable amount of carbon sequestration from that capital, right? So this effectively means, how do we actually verify that people are doing what they say they're doing? And there's a lot of technologies that can be integrated with blockchain carbon markets to improve that measurement and verification process. So for us, it's not actually just about Web3 and blockchain. It's actually all of the technology that can be layered on top of it and integrated with those systems. So specifically, I'm talking about drones and remote sensors and also artificial intelligence to actually make that measurement and verification possible at scale. So this is all a bunch of jargon, but if you think about it in terms of actual real world, like how would this work? Think of it this way. Imagine that someone who is a farmer with a bunch of acres of land, who is registered as a climate project in one of these carbon registries, says that they're pulling a bunch of carbon out of the atmosphere by switching to regenerative farming practices, which is something that we're trying to encourage among agricultural communities worldwide. Imagine if there's a drone that can fly over their land and take that imagery, feed it into a system that's powered by artificial intelligence that can process the information and say, okay, this is what the land looks like right now. And then in a year, if they are able to make progress on growing more trees and improving the regenerative agriculture implementation of different practices, and whether, depending on which part of the world they're in, it'll look very different. Whether it's in Southeast Asia or Canada, it's going to be a completely different look and a different kind of process. But either way, you can use drone imaging again over time to see, okay, how did the land change? Did they actually sequester more carbon, and how much more? And can we measure that using technology so that we can actually issue carbon credits against the progress that they're making and basically pay them for their good work? And in cases where the work doesn't happen, not pay them, so that there's not money going into projects that aren't working. So I think that impact verification is actually one of the more exciting reasons to switch to a digital carbon marketplace, because then you can have these things happen automatically in the background and have carbon credits issued automatically based on technology, as opposed to needing to send someone out in a truck to measure the width of the trees and things like that, which becomes very, very cumbersome and manual, especially if you think about doing that at a global scale at the speed we need to go.
You have me nerding out right now, because I love the different technologies, because I talk a lot about systems thinking, and I say Web3 is nothing but systems thinking. It's integration of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and blockchain. So that's exactly what you talked about. I just never looked at it that way, the way you explained it. That's amazing. So So based on what you've seen, because I know you talk to a lot of decision makers and a lot of stakeholders within this space. What are the challenges and drawbacks that you see into wide adoption of this movement? It's a movement.
Yeah, it is a movement. Look, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. It's not going to be easy. I think a few that come to mind are I think the biggest one for me is that we need to move at an unprecedented level of speed, and the adoption of this technology needs to happen incredibly quickly in order for the markets to kind of integrate this tech and be ready to scale at the speed they need to go. Because in order for the voluntary side of carbon markets, which is like the unregulated side, the side where it's just corporations making these pledges towards net zero. And then, there's also the regulated side, which is industries like aviation that are required to offset their emissions. Regardless, the speed at which these carbon markets need to scale in order to meet our global decarbonization goals to keep us on that 1.5 degree Celsius pathway is like really fast. Like I was looking at a chart earlier today. I'll try to pull that up to put specific numbers, but it's like 10x over the next 10 years. It needs to happen very quickly, right? And so if you look at the industry and where it's at now and say, are folks ready to adopt this technology quickly enough in order to integrate the systems and put them in place and continue growing that quickly, I think is a big coordination challenge, and it will require a lot of stakeholders coordinating at a speed that is ambitious. I think it's definitely possible, and it's our mission to try and help put our finger on the scale and make it happen. But we're talking about regulatory agencies, certification agencies, corporate sustainability teams, technology startups, policymakers, and farmers on the ground, right? Like, it's so many people that need to kind of work together on this. I think the other kind of, maybe if I'm going to call out one other big challenge that feels important, it's like the credibility and reputational pieces. I think this has two layers to me. It's like, it's not just that Web3 is perceived as kind of smoke and mirrors by the general public, and a lot of people think of Web3 and they think of Bored Ape NFTs, or they think of FTX, the massive, very public scandal that came out of the news around these big crypto exchanges collapsing and being some to some extent built on a house of cards. And that, I think, really hurts the credibility of the underlying Web3 technology, even though for use cases like this one, I think there's actually a really good case to be made that folks are doing it with the best intentions. They're being buttoned up about their process, and they're it's definitely not a Ponzi scheme or anything like it. It's not even a cryptocurrency. I think there's still that reputational challenge of when you bring it to someone who's, a policymaker, and you tell them that it's built on blockchain, they associate it with those kind of maybe more negative stories in the media. And then carbon markets have their own issues with credibility too, right? Like, if you take out blockchain from the picture for a moment and you think just about carbon offsets, I think if folks have very little knowledge of carbon offsets, if they've heard anything, they've probably heard something like John Oliver's segment about carbon offsets a few months ago that talked about how there's a bunch of fraud happening within the industry where people are paying to preserve a forest, but the forest was never going to get cut down anyway. And stories like that really hurt the credibility of carbon markets too. And so I think that's kind of a credibility double whammy, if you will, that we need to overcome, which is basically just means, I think, telling the story of how this technology can be highly impactful, and hopefully distancing ourselves from some of the more negative pieces of the blockchain and the carbon markets that have gotten a lot of coverage. I'll just finish that answer by saying, I think that in an attempt to do that now, I think the best argument for why we should still try to put trust and faith into these systems is that if you think about what carbon markets were meant to do, it's the best tool that we have right now to funnel corporate capital into climate change mitigation, right? It's like there are billions of dollars sitting in large corporations waiting to be deployed into climate projects. It's just a matter of, can we make sure that money goes to the right place? And I think it's a huge missed opportunity if we don't. You can say all you want about how carbon markets, have had issues in the past, but to me, it's not okay. Then let's do away with carbon markets. To me, the answer is okay. Then let's close those gaps. Let's make it better. Let's make everything verifiable. Let's make everything transparent. And that's what the whole blockchain carbon market kind of movement is trying to do.
Excellent. Yeah. So I got two more questions here. Hopefully we can fit it in.
Yeah. Let's do it. Sorry, I'll stop being so long-winded.
Yeah. So whenever you talk, so here's the one question I've had often, where with the voluntary markets and with these organizations performing their pledges, in your opinion, based on what you know, because you know better than I do, is it mostly greenwashing, or are these organizations indeed, doing what they say they're going to do based on your opinion?
I think there's a spectrum of answers to that question based on the organization, as you can imagine. But I think that a lot of organizations truly do want to do their part to contribute to the global solution to climate change. I think that on a lot of corporate sustainability teams that we've talked to and that we know are entering the market, they really are anxious and concerned that their money could be used in improper ways, and they want to be assured that they're not taking a risk by spending millions of dollars on climate mitigation. That they basically want to see the receipts. They're like, okay, like we'll spend money on offsets, but like, we don't want this to blow back in our faces because it's claims of greenwashing, because it goes to one of these fraudulent projects that are getting covered in the news, right? So I actually think that a lot of corporate sustainability teams are super aware that they could be accused of greenwashing. They really don't want to be. They really have the best intentions in mind. I think the challenge is that we, as carbon market operators, you could say, in the industry, need to give them a product that actually de-risks their spending and make sure that the money goes into actual solutions. Now, are there some corporates that are just jumping on the bandwagon because it's good for marketing? Sure, I'm sure there are, right? Like there's no way there's not. I'm sure there's some teams that are like, okay, everyone's doing this, so we need to do it too. We need to say we're going net zero. But I really do think that there are a lot of leaders in the marketplace that are coming in and saying, like, how do we make sure that this is actually contributing to climate change solutions? And it's really a matter of making sure that we can track the spend and show them the receipts they want to see. And I think that's what the blockchain is good at doing.
Excellent. So, all right. So last question before we wrap up. So my biggest thing is, how do we educate the policymakers? How do we educate the masses on this movement and initiative? In your opinion, just very quickly, like, how do you think that we, myself, as well as everyone viewing this video, can do that? It's a call to action. Your call to action, in terms of education.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, it breaks down into a few different audiences, right? So I think it's important to think about who are you interested in convincing, and who are you able to convince? What is your position in this very complicated, very dynamic web of people trying to work on this issue? I think that from my perspective within the industry right now, the most important people to convince are the ones who are actually the institutional actors who are necessary to speed this whole thing along. And that means policymakers, economists, governmental institutions, and NGOs, like folks who are actually doing the work, and bringing them on board So to that extent, I think the research, like exactly what you're doing, is super important to sort of verify these claims, get the word out, get it published in, from reputable academics like yourself who can actually put their seal of approval on like, hey, this technology is actually probably a good idea. That's super helpful. I think there's also a level of just educating the general population that you mentioned too, like so that folks actually understand what is the point of a carbon market. Why should I still hope that they work even though I'm being told they don't? Because like I said, it's an incredible mechanism for channeling corporate capital into on the ground environmental conservation. And so if folks understand that basic link, I think that, it changes the conversation a little bit. And I totally understand, and I actually sympathize with concerns about greenwashing, concerns about, fraud. Those are really, really big concerns that are super important that we as an industry need to address. And I think that, any educational material that can get put out on social media or in the more traditional media channels is super useful for bringing folks along that journey in terms of education on carbon markets and like actually useful applications of blockchain. But like I said, I think right now it's really important to make sure that folks in the climate and policymaking community and folks in the business community who are controlling these big corporate sustainability budgets understand that if they invest in some of these on-chain carbon markets early, they will help actually unlock they won't just meet their sustainability goals, they will unlock a market that is ready for scale for all of the companies that are going to follow them. So if they want to be market leaders, I think they should try and invest now to help make sure the market's ready for everyone else.
That's excellent. So Michael, thank you for that. Thank you for your time today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so our website is climatecollective.org. I'm listed on there. You can see me on Twitter and LinkedIn we're going to be putting out a couple of white papers soon. So we'll probably post those on our website as well.
All right. Thanks once again. And for everyone else, until next time.